Greetings. Today I'm going to turn my discussion away from French history and begin to give you some overviews about the key political institutions in France. And I'm going to do this over several of these mini lectures. Now, to tie history back to institutions, one of the emphasis of the historical lectures was to let you know that historically, it is the centralization of authority that has been the most salient or the most important characteristic of French government. And obviously, we saw the centralization of authority during the period before the French Revolution with the very, very strong executive powers, those strong kings. And of course, the French Revolution is kind of a watershed event and changes political regimes quite a bit. As I pointed out, there have been 15 constitutions in France since 1789, and only 5 of the 15 have dealt with republics or with democratic regimes. So the current government came from a political crisis over France's colonial war in Algeria, and we call that the Algerian crisis. Keep in mind that de Gaulle was a critic of both the Third and the Fourth Republics. And so, in the Constitution that he devised in the summer and fall of 1958, and that went into law on January 1st, 1959, there really are two themes in the Fifth Republic, just as general overviews to kind of let you know where we're going to go in the lectures ahead. And obviously, the first of those is a resurrection of strong executive powers. Until the Fifth Republic, the only periods of time where we had strong executive leadership was during authoritarian regimes. A strong king like Louis XIV, a strong military strongman like Napoleon, for example. And so de Gaulle believed that the haunting criticism or the haunting lack of executive leadership was really the primary problem of the first four republics. So de Gaulle in the Fifth Republic reconstitutes authority under the leadership of a strong executive, the president. And if you follow along in your notes, I gave you some specific data. If you look back to the Fourth Republic, which obviously preceded the de Gaulle Constitution, there were only two prime ministers that lasted for more than 1 year. And only one prime minister going all the way back to 1875, going back to the Third Republic, lasted 5 years. So there was an absolute lack of executive continuity, and de Gaulle wanted to address that. So in your notes, you'll see that I have listed that the chief problem of the Third and Fourth Republics was the weakness of the executive, whose survival depended on unstable legislative coalitions. Keep in mind that the Third and Fourth Republic was committed to equity and equality. And in class earlier, when we were meeting face to face, one of the things that I tried to explain to you in this particular case is that in a parliamentary system, remember, the prime minister must maintain the support of a majority of the legislature. And whether that legislature is the House of Commons, if we're talking about Britain, or the National Assembly in France, a prime minister is only going to serve as long as they can maintain the support of the parliament. And in this particular case, de Gaulle wanted to rescue the president. He did not want to make the president dependent at all on support from the legislature. And so as a result, what de Gaulle did was he made the president independent of the legislature, that he would not be elected and could not be removed by the legislature. And so in this particular case, we're not going to have a situation where we're going to have 26 or 27 governments in 12 years like we did under the Fourth Republic, because we're going to have a very, very strong president who is independent of the legislature. And of course, today, the president of the country is elected by the voters of the country and cannot be removed by the legislature unless he is removed for treason. And so that is an incredibly, incredibly high bar. So the first theme of the Fifth Republic, or as I call it, the de Gaulle Constitution, is there was a reconstruction of authority under the leadership of a strong president. So that gets rid of the first weakness of the Fourth Republic, that being very, very weak executive officers who were dependent on unstable coalitions. The second major theme of the Fifth Republic that you can see in your notes is a what I call a rationalized parliament with very limited political and legislative powers, coupled with more coherent and disciplined party systems. So if you go look at the Third and the Fourth Republics, if you want to go look up specific provisions, you can go online and do that. But in both the Third and the Fourth Republics, the Prime Minister was selected by the lower house, just like in Great Britain, right? The Prime Minister is chosen as the majority party of their legislature, and the same thing was true in France. The biggest difference, though, between the Third and Fourth Republics in France versus the House of Commons, even during the same time period, is that, remember, in Britain, elections took place like in America, single-member district, or what I called single-member plurality elections. So representatives represented a district, and so whoever got the most votes in that district got the seat. Now, during the Third and Fourth Republics in France, it was very, very different. Elections were by proportional representation, which means that political parties got seats in proportion to the vote that they attracted. So that meant that there was a huge proliferation of political parties that were represented in the legislature. It was certainly democratic in the notion that a political party got political power in the legislature directly proportional to the vote that they could attract in the populace. But as I mentioned earlier, the tragic result of proportional representation is that while you get a lot of equality and political parties are represented equitably and fairly, the problem is that this creates very unstable governing coalitions. And when you couple that with a lack of party discipline, what we saw in France was that local interests were overwhelmingly represented at the expense of national interests. If you go down to the next paragraph, I start analyzing de Gaulle's semi-presidential system, and I call it semi-presidential. Roskin calls it super presidential. You can use either term, but it's presidential in the sense that in the United States, the executive, that would be the president, and the legislature, this would be the House of Representatives and the Senate, they're elected completely independent from one another. So you can and often do have presidents of one party and a legislature of the other party. Both the Congress and the president have differing powers. We call that separation of powers. Neither the president or the Congress is answerable to the other, so they have independent powers. They have independent agendas, and certainly they cooperate from time to time, but there is nothing formally linking them together. And I illustrated that, remember, back with Britain, when I said Britain had a situation in Britain where they had fusion of powers, where the executive, in this case the Prime Minister, is also a member of the House of Commons. But the French system does not have that. The president does not serve in the legislature, and so they are independent. They both are elected by the voters in France, but separately. Keep in mind that the voters don't directly elect the prime minister. The prime minister is another member of the House of Commons who happens to be the leader of the majority party. In a parliamentary system like Britain, the executive, that would be the prime minister, and the legislature, the House of Commons, are fused. They both have important powers over one another, and I talked about those at length, so I'll just read what's in your notes, and I'll just make maybe one or two incredibly quick comments. In Britain, the cabinet and the prime minister is accountable to the parliament. And so the parliament, in this case the House of Commons, can either pressure a resignation of a prime minister, or actually the House of Commons, remember, can pass a formal vote of no confidence. Now, that has not happened since 1979, when Margaret Thatcher orchestrated kind of a coup, in a sense, that she was able to get the House of Commons to vote no confidence. Mr. Callahan then did call for new elections, and of course, we have a situation where in 1979, Mrs. Thatcher came to power. In the semi-presidential system, which is what I'm going to call France, there is not a complete separation between the legislature and the executive. So, as I mentioned earlier in class, in Great Britain, political power is a two-way street. The party can compel a resignation of a prime minister, the parliament can vote no confidence, or the people can remove a prime minister. But the prime minister has awesome weapons over the legislature. They can call for early elections and put the whole legislature at risk. Remember, this happened with Theresa May. Theresa May had a slight majority in the House of Commons. She called for elections early, and remember, it backfired on her. She lost her majority control in the Commons, and she was forced to create a coalition government with a very, very small Northern Irish nationalist party. In France, the president dominates the legislature, and the president can dissolve the parliament once a year, provoking legislative elections without putting his seat at risk. This is a huge difference than Britain, where the prime minister puts his seat at risk when he calls for early elections. The president does have separation of powers because the National Assembly, which would be the parliament, cannot force the president to resign or call for presidential elections early. The government, which would be the cabinet members as well as the prime minister, are appointed by the president, but they are answerable to the parliament, who can force the government, which would be their prime minister, not their president, to resign with a censure vote. So, like in presidential systems, voters do elect the legislative and executive branches differently. And the result of this is that the French system is very popular with its citizenry. Now, this data is 2 years old, but as of late 2017, 61% of French voters were positive about French institutions. 89% of them support a direct election of the president, which they do have. Originally, de Gaulle gave presidents a 7-year term. It now is 5 years, and I'll talk more about that later. And 91% of French voters support the power of the president having the referendum power. And this is a huge difference between France and the United States. In France, the president can take a measure directly to the voters for approval. Obviously, in the United States, the president does not have that power, and imagine how different American presidential power would be if they could take measures directly to the voters.